Now there are a lot of things with respect to network part, okay? But we'll talk about that a bit later. Before that, we'll talk about RBAC, okay? So what do you mean by RBAC here? Guys, according to you, what
RBAC.
is RBAC? So RBAC stands for role-based access control. Okay, we'll talk about what is RBAC. RBAC stands for role-based access control, which means you have to give the roles, right? Or you have to assign the roles to the containers, to the pods which are running, so that those pods can access the resources from each other using a different mechanisms. Example, how and where you can control the role or RBAC. One is at the user level, right? You can control the things at the user level, that okay, I have a particular user to whom I will give the access for so and so pod, okay, or for so and so namespaces. But those all things are there where we are controlling at the user end. But when I have to say that the particular user with which it is working, or the particular role to this namespace or to this pod which is there, right? Those things are what that we will not give everyone the admin rights. Right now we don't have anything, right? We have everything as a default. We want to give the read access to the pods. We want to give the default access to the pods. So here under the access control, you will see we will have cluster roles and cluster role bindings. These two work together, okay? Roles and role bindings work together. There will be a role created and there will be a role which will be binded to it. There will be a role created and there will be a role which will be binded to it. Now, when I say cluster role, so cluster role is nothing, it is basically at the cluster level. When I say cluster role binding, it is the role which has been attached to the cluster role we have created. What's the difference? We'll see. When I say role and role binding, so that means it is at the pod level and things. Let me show you the role and the role binding, right? And how you can control the access per user and things. We'll create a kind name as a role, okay, at a namespace such an NS, give the API version as RBAC, and name as a pod reader. In this, we define the rules. What we define? We define the rules. Here we rules has three things: API groups, resources, and verbs. Verbs means whatever operation you want to do. It can be get, it can be list, it can be watch, it can be update, right? It can be update, okay? It can be more of anything. All of these will are the verbs which allow some operations. Resources, what? Your pod logs you want to give, right? Or you want to give the resources to status of the pod to check, right? You want to give the services resources, right? You want to give it to deployments. Accordingly, you can create the resources. API groups, right? API groups are what? You can say that what kind of API groups you want the things, right? Is it like this is the API group, right? You want it to extensions, okay? You want it to the apps, you want it to all, or if you want it to the particular version you have used. So normally role has what? Role has three main sections, that is the verb, that is the resources, and the API groups, which define your entire rules. The same role binding will do nothing. It will say that okay, to which subject I have to bind a role. To which subject I have to bind a role. Then you say, okay, to subject, bind a role to this particular user with the name as this, okay, and for these API, for this RBAC API group also you define, and then in the role reference, because all the configuration are defined where at a role level. So then in the role reference, they define the particular role configuration, that which role has to be read. So it says name the reader pod reader. So it will read that only. So this is how role and role binding looks like. Now, if you create this role, kubectl apply minus f RBAC.yaml minus n Sachin hyphen ns. Okay. So it will start creating a role here and also the role binding. Okay, and based on the user and things, you can access the services within the pod and within the stuff using this. So likewise, the cluster role or cluster role binding also works. But so role is what? It is set of permissions, right? It is set of permissions you define. While role binding is what? It is basically connecting those roles together, right? It is connecting those roles together. Role you define for specific user groups or service accounts or all those things. Whereas whenever you have to define cluster wide things and all, whenever you don't have to define the resources, the permission at the namespace level. Right now we are defining where? At the namespace level. But when you don't have to define the things at the namespace level, that time you have the cluster role and cluster role bindings. Okay. That time we have the cluster roles and cluster role bindings.